Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Kyo Kim. In the final month before President-elect Joe Biden takes office in the White House, the U.S. State Department introduced measures to step up enforcement of sanctions on North Korea. Meanwhile, South Korea's parliamentary committee passed an anti-North Korea leafleting bill, stirring up controversy as some see the move as an attempt to appease the North Korean regime. Today we'll discuss these and more. Joining us is Patricia Kim, Senior Policy Analyst with the China Program at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Dr. Kim was a Stanton Nuclear Security Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Scott Snyder also joins us today. He's Director of the Program on U.S.-Korea Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, South Korea at the Crossroads, examines the trajectory of South Korean foreign policy. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Young-Kyo.
Thank you.
Okay, first of all, the U.S. State Department has launched a new website, dprkrewards.com, through which individuals across the globe can provide information on North Korean sanctions evasion. Is the United States enhancing pressure on North Korea, Dr. Kim?
This new website, dprkrewards.com, is indeed one additional tool for strengthening the economic pressure campaign against North Korea. But its launch is coming in the very last weeks of the Trump administration, and therefore it doesn't really seem to be part of a coherent negotiating strategy towards Pyongyang. In fact, the intended focus of this website rollout seems to be China, not North Korea. Because if you listen to Deputy Special Representative Alex Wong's speech at CSIS earlier this week, which announced the launch of this website, much of it is devoted to criticizing China's lax enforcement of sanctions and its turning of a blind eye toward illicit North Korean commercial activities that are going on within and around China's borders. And Wong also used this speech to emphasize the fact that the United States has and will continue to sanction complicit Chinese entities. So all in all, the website and messaging by the State Department seem to be a part of the Trump administration's series of final moves to lock in a tough stance on China before leaving office.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Snyder, why do you think the State Department came up with this now?
Well, I agree that it is an expression of frustration with regard to China, and also it is evidence that the maximum pressure strategy at this point so far has failed to achieve the desired result. A lot of that, I think, is because of what China has done in terms of failing to enforce the UN Security Council resolutions. And really, I think that the greatest disappointment is that China has essentially given North Korea what it wanted at Hanoi without getting anything in return. And sanctions was the leverage that was designed to drive North Korea towards denuclearization.
Mr. Snyder, you said that it highlights the failure to maintain maximum pressure. What were the problems in executing sanctions on North Korea so far?
Well, there are a lot of problems. The biggest one that I just pointed to is Chinese complicity. It's really Chinese prioritization of geopolitics in terms of its relationship with North Korea over the denuclearization objective. But Alex Wong really pointed to the fact that China is serving the role of middleman for North Korea in procurement in a number of areas, especially sensitive items, and in the areas that were banned by the UN Security Council resolutions. Also, I would point out that with regard to financial transactions in the international community, North Korea relies on partners, and we have also seen North Korea develop its cyber capabilities in ways that have been very effective at evading the sanctions regime.
Dr. Kim, you also mentioned how this recent move by the State Department is directed at China. So is China really the major obstacle in enforcing North Korean sanctions?
So I agree with Scott. I think, one of the reasons why enforcement is so difficult is because North Korea is very skilled at sanctions evasion and has learned to live and continue to expand its nuclear weapons program, even under very restrictive circumstances. And the other major weak link is China. With North Korea no longer conducting nuclear and missile tests and the Korean Peninsula no longer facing the threat of imminent war, I think Beijing has become less and less stringent in strict sanctions enforcement, and it continues to serve as North Korea's economic lifeline and to provide enough laxity so that the Kim regime can continue to survive, which renders the economic pressure campaign that the United States and others have been trying to enforce much less effective.
And as both of you pointed out, Deputy Assistant Secretary for North Korea, Alex Wong, accused China of seeking to undo the United Nations sanctions regime aimed at persuading North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. But China keeps insisting it abides by UN sanctions on North Korea. Dr. Kim, what is your thought on China's response?
Well, Beijing has officially responded as expected by insisting that it has not violated sanctions and that it takes its duties as a UN Security Council member very seriously. Unsurprisingly, in its official response, Beijing has turned the blame around to criticize Washington for bringing on hardship on the people of North Korea through its sanctions. And this reflects the typical tendency, I think, of Chinese leaders to be very sympathetic towards Pyongyang's position, and that the United States hostile policy, quote unquote hostile policy, is the cause of its military and nuclear buildup.
And Mr. Snyder, is there any way to hold China more accountable on this front?
Well, there are not that many options. I would say that rather than a reward site, what I would prefer to see is the application of financial penalties on Chinese firms that cooperate with North Korea. I think that there have been some moves in Congress to try to push the administration in that direction, but they haven't really been formalized. And I think it'll be very interesting to see whether that might be a next step that could occur. Frankly, it's something that would be better enforced in a Trump administration in the waning days than leaving it to the Biden administration to do.
Mm-hmm. Lee Jong-ho, one of the highest level defectors to flee North Korea, said the U.S. needs to tighten sanctions against North Korea, focusing on blocking the markets of China and Russia. Is this something that the Biden team should consider?
Well, I think Lee Jong-ho is really just pointing to the idea of secondary sanctions on partners with North Korea. And so he's really pointing to the way to the idea that if your partners won't enforce sanctions, then you may have to do what you can unilaterally.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Kim, Biden's diplomatic team is widely seen to believe engaging China is important in dealing with North Korea. Will the new administration be able to make this approach effective?
So the Biden administration has committed to work with China on critical global challenges, including on North Korea. And Beijing has also messaged that it seeks to cooperate with the United States in areas of common concern. But it remains to be seen how the two states will actually operationalize such a relationship. I personally think it's unlikely at the moment that Washington and Beijing will be working very intimately anytime soon to inject momentum into negotiations with North Korea, given the looming strategic competition between the United States and China that is here for the long term. I think rather the momentum to restart negotiations will more likely be driven by North Korea's actions, whether provocative or conciliatory, perhaps South Korean initiatives, and maybe or fresh American negotiating team that's empowered and galvanized by the incoming Biden administration. But to be honest, I'm not sure how much intimate coordination there will be between Beijing and Washington anytime soon.
Meanwhile, South Korea's unification minister, Lee In-young, renewed calls that North Korea must refrain from undertaking provocations amid concern that Pyongyang could try to test the approach of the incoming Biden administration. Dr. Kim, why do you think people keep talking about the possible North Korean provocations? Are there any actual signs?
I think these predictions are based on historical patterns exhibited by North Korea and Kim Jong-un's recent declarations that he's no longer bound by the self-imposed moratorium on nuclear and missile tests, and his continued hints that he will be delivering strategic surprises. And also in October, North Korea showcased increasingly sophisticated missile systems at the recent parade celebrating the 75th anniversary of its Workers' Party. And there's also assessments by the expert community that North Korea will want to continue conducting missile tests to further cement the credibility of the nuclear and missile threat that it poses against the continental United States. So, I think these are the reasons why folks are speculating that there may be a test soon. But some others have also pointed out that North Korea may not engage in a provocation anytime soon, given the economic hardships that it's experiencing at the moment, as well as the probable desire by the Kim Jong-un regime to gauge the incoming Biden administration's willingness to engage. But I think if North Korea feels that it's being ignored for too long by the new administration, or that the prospects for a favorable negotiating situation are low in the short term, it may very well carry out another provocation to increase its leverage at the negotiating table in the future.
Mr. Snyder, you've been saying that North Korea will have a lot to lose if they pursue provocations, especially in the beginning of the Biden administration. You still hold that view?
Yeah, I do. I believe that it's not in North Korea's interest to pursue provocations as a strategy. But I don't deny that Pyongyang's track record is one in which it has tried to test new political leaders by engaging in provocations. It's just that at this moment, North Korea, having developed its nuclear deterrent, by using provocations at an early stage, it's actually signaling weakness rather than strength. Also, it runs the risk of shifting China's focus back to denuclearization from geopolitics, and it compounds the economic problems that North Korea is currently facing. So those are all reasons why I think that North Korea should be cautious, but I cannot guarantee that they will be cautious.
And recently, South Korea's parliamentary committee, led by the ruling party, passed a proposal to ban floating balloons and bottles filled with propaganda leaflets into North Korea. Mr. Snyder, is this move concerning to you?
Yes, it is. This is a very concerning development because it symbolizes democratic regression in South Korea. It's particularly shocking in my view because this is under the administration of the candlelight president who has branded himself as at the vanguard of a pro-democratic movement that has been successful in South Korea. And also it's problematic because this move comes after Kim Yo-jong publicly demanded that these balloon launches be stopped. And so it looks like Moon is acting at the behest of the North Korean leadership. And so for all these reasons, it's really a negative step. And I think that it is one that, especially in the transition to a new Biden administration, can run the risk of creating problems early on in the alliance.
Dr. Kim, what is your view on this?
So I very much agree with Scott, and I find this development concerning because the law is limiting the freedom of expression, which is contrary to South Korea's democratic values. The Moon government's rationale for banning the leaflet activity is based on a desire not to provoke the North Koreans, to stay on North Korea's good side, to push forth inter-Korean relations. But at what cost does this come? I don't think it's wise to be trading one's democratic freedoms to stay on North Korea's good side.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Kim, what kind of message will this send to the North Korean regime, do you think?
Well, I don't know if it's the best message. I think it shows that South Korea can be coerced by North Korea, and I think it's very important to stand firm on core democratic principles and not to show weakness on these kinds of important fronts. So I empathize with Seoul's desire to improve inter-Korean relations and to create momentum to revive stalled negotiations, because peace on the Korean Peninsula is very important as well. And so I empathize with those goals, but this must be done in a way that doesn't give in to North Korean demands while impinging on South Korea's own democratic system.
Mm-hmm. As Dr. Kim pointed out, the South Korean government and the ruling party insist that this kind of move will help improve the inter-Korean relationship. But Mr. Snyder, do you agree with this view?
Well, it comes at a cost because South Korea is being respected around the world for the efficiency and capability of its democratic system right now. But by treating North Korea as an exception, or by allowing this sort of move to occur, it actually undermines some of those accomplishments. And so it comes, I think, at the cost of South Korea's reputation, which has been so actively and heartily built over the course of the past decades.
Mm-hmm. It was reported that meetings about the North Korean policies are expected to take place between the Biden transition team and the State Department in the coming weeks, possibly allowing the Biden team to have an access to the letters President Donald Trump exchanged with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. How will this affect Biden's new North Korean strategy?
Well, I'm not sure that the letters are going to be the key piece of information. Rather, I think that the challenge for the Biden administration is going to be to coordinate the many different points of view on North Korea, including strengthening deterrence and considering China policy, while also trying to establish a positive message of outreach to North Korea. And I think there's some early challenges for the Biden administration related to signaling toward North Korea in the areas of how to deal with sanctions, how a human rights envoy is appointed, and also the quality and nature of the initial consultations between the U.S. and South Korea.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Kim, your thoughts?
So I agree with Scott. I'm not really sure if the letters will be very important, the content inside the letters on informing Biden's approach to North Korea. I think the bigger issue will be on the Biden side, figuring out, how they want to structure and time their initial outreach to North Korea, how they're going to actually implement the strategy that Biden has promised to empower negotiators at the working level, to work with allies and partners, as well as China, to be able to put forward a coherent negotiating strategy with North Korea, as well as, what is the best path forward? Are you going to go with arms control type measures in the beginning, or do we want to go back to a mini deal or a large deal? I mean, I think these are the more substantive questions that are on the table in the months going forward, as opposed to, President Trump's personal exchanges with Kim Jong-un.
And indeed, we'll have to watch how those meetings will help set the tone of how the Biden team will develop its North Korean strategy. Dr. Kim and Mr. Snyder, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.